What's up, guys? So my fiance and I recently built this mobile chicken coop from lumber we felled and processed here on the property with our Woodmiser LT15 sawmill. I'll link the video to the full build at the end, but I wanted to do a quick deep dive into the basic solar install we ended up going with here. This setup should work as a pretty cheap off-grid solar solution for small applications like a shed or chicken coop. I'm by no means a solar expert, but I did some homework and a little bit of trial and error before reaching what we got here. So feel free to drop a comment if you see something that I should have done differently, or I'm about to end up with some fried chicken. Up top, we've got a 100 watt solar panel that I got on Amazon for $60. For now, it'll be zip tied to this 2x3 we've got ratchet strapped across the roof to a couple of eye hooks. The goal here was to drill as few holes as possible into the roof to avoid any potential leaking. I may eventually make a more permanent bracket, but first wanted to see if I would need any more panels based on the current setup. For $60, this panel is pretty nice. It's got a waterproof junction box and MC4 connectors. I did have to get an additional 5-foot MC4 extender that goes down into the coop here. I drilled a few holes, fed the cables through, and caulked the holes with an exterior silicone caulk. Coming inside the chicken coop, you got a few different things going on here. I promise it looks more complicated than it is. This setup or something similar should work as a cheap off-grid solution for any shed or chicken coop. So you got your red for positive, black is negative. These are the incoming MC4 wires from the panel that feed this 12-volt charge controller that I got on Amazon for $20. I think of the charge controller as the brain of the operation. It regulates the incoming current from the solar panel, and it allows it to pass through and charge the battery without overcharging it. The battery is connected here and runs over to the battery box. I got a single 24 DC marine deep cycle battery for around $90 at Walmart. Deep cycle batteries are specifically designed for a slow, consistent discharge as opposed to a starting battery that would be in your car that's designed for short bursts of high current, like starting your car. This single DC battery makes it a 12-volt system with 101 amp hours. That just means it could theoretically run a 1 amp load for 101 hours. You could double the battery lifespan to 202 amp hours if you added a second 24 DC battery and wired it in parallel, connecting the positive to positive and negative to negative. But for what we need here, this will be fine. Going back over to the charge controller, there is another function that this specific controller has that not all of them have, and that's a load connection. This is where you tie in whatever you're trying to provide DC power to up to 10 amps. For the chicken coop, I wired this to feed a few computer fans I had laying around to give the chicken some air in here during the summer. What's cool about this charge controller is that it has this LCD display that cycles through screens telling you the incoming voltage and current from the panel, the voltage or charge of the battery, and how many amps the load is currently drawing. Right now it's reading the battery voltage at 12.5, which is around 90% charge. The panel is pulling 4.5 amps and the fans are pulling around 1 amp. Going back down the load wires, they first go to this low voltage disconnect that I got on Amazon for $10 for a 2-pack. Think of this as a switch that kills the power to the downstream fans if the voltage of the battery drops below a certain preset number. I have it set to disconnect when the battery voltage drops below 11.7 volts, which would be about 25% life remaining for the deep cycle battery. If the voltage drops below 10.5, this battery would be 100% discharge and will start to damage the battery, and we don't want that. The positive and negative in is here, and the out is here. The positive out is wired to a manual switch to turn the fans on and off, and then goes to an inline fuse that has a 2 amp fuse in it. That way, if the chickens peck the wires somewhere down the line, the fuse will blow if the current exceeds 2 amps instead of heating up and starting a fire. At the end of the line over here are the computer fans that I tied together and mounted onto a board. I use these solder seal wire connectors that work pretty well from Amazon. You hit it with the heat gun, the solder melts, and the connection is fully waterproof. Okay, back to the wall mount. So if your goal is to run a few fans and some LED lights that are DC power, then you're good to go with the setup we just walked through. If you're looking to power anything with 110 volt AC power, like a drill battery charger or LED string lights that have a normal male wall plug, you're going to need a power inverter. All a power inverter does is convert the 12 volt battery DC power to 110 volt AC power. This is a 500 watt inverter from Amazon that I got for $35. Probably a little overkill for what I need here, but I may end up putting a 250 watt heat lamp in here over the winter to keep these guys warm. I might have to add another panel and battery for that, but we'll see. Any decent sized load you'd put on this inverter trips the 10 amp max load on the charge controller. I actually did wire it to the charge controller load, and the current needed to start the inverter must exceed 10 amps because it didn't start. So instead we've got this 30 amp low voltage disconnect that will work with a bigger draw. It's essentially the same as the other low voltage disconnect, but meant for applications that require more power. We also wire it so the V-in comes directly from the battery. The V-out feeds the inverter, which initially comes with a car charger plug. On this inverter, it wasn't clear which wire was positive and which was negative, and the internet said it depends on the manufacturer. So I ended up smashing the car charger to see which is which. The topmost pin is always positive, so in this case, the solid black wire was positive and the black with white stripe was negative. The main reason I went with the inverter for this setup was to power this smart receptacle that powers this single light. The brand is TREATLIFE from Amazon. I think a 4-pack was $30. I have a few of this brand's receptacles and switches throughout my house, and they're all connected to Wi-Fi and automated to turn on and off at sunrise or sunset. We also control them with Alexa, and it just makes life easier. There's something like a 20% efficiency loss when converting from DC to AC, so running the inverter even at close to idle with the low draw of the lights does drain the battery pretty good. The last thing I wanted to mention was the placement of the solar panels themselves. We're in PA on the east coast of the US in the northern hemisphere, so we want to position the panels facing true south to maximize direct sunlight and energy output. We're in a heavily wooded area, which restricts the amount of hours per day the panels are in direct sunlight. Ideally, you'd want to set up your panels in an open area that's exposed to the most sunlight possible. In the peak sun hours, this 100-watt panel has been generating close to 6 amps. So far, it's been enough to fully recharge the 101 amp hour battery after discharging overnight around 2 amps per hour between the fans and the inverter load. If we get a few cloudy days where there's little production from the panels, chickens may end up in the dark. For that reason, I think I may add a second battery and panel at some point. This setup should work as a pretty cheap off-grid solar solution for small applications like a shed or a chicken coop. For $200 to $300, gets a job done and should last some years with very little manual intervention. Hopefully this helps someone, and let me know if there's anything you would have done different.